But we're now going to move a little bit from the world of art more towards the world of science. And I would like to tell you a few things about Beau Lotto, who is sitting with me here tonight. So first of all, Beau Lotto is a scientist. He is a neuroscientist, a scientist with labs in UCL in London, also in New York and NYU. He is a man driven by curiosity, as many scientists are. But secondly, he is a misfit. And he is somewhat proud, I think, of this fact. He is a scientist who doesn't fit in. And he is a scientist who has always tended to bring his labs out of the university and bring them and plant them in unexpected locations. And he has founded the Lab of Misfits now, appropriately enough, in New York. And he'll be telling us a little bit more about what the Lab of Misfits is and how he is using neuroscience to find ways where we can actually change our perceptions. And that's going to be the core of our discussion tonight, I hope. But there is a third thing about Beau, and this is why I have to do the introduction, because Beau is an incredibly humble and self-effacing man, and he really loathes self-promotion of any kind.
I paid him especially for that bit.
And so I took Beau out this afternoon to the site where we will create this museum that Steffi mentioned, the Biotopia, out in Schloss Nymphenburg, in a beautiful place, if any of you haven't been there, in the west of Munich. We began chatting just casually about tonight's session and what we might talk about. And I said, well, yeah, Beau, what about the book? Do you think we should talk about your book? He said, well, no, not really. And I said, but didn't you just publish a book called Deviate? Yes. Okay. And wasn't there a German edition of that? Oh, yeah, it came out this week. Yeah. Oh, do you have a copy of it? No. Do you have a copy of the English version? No. So I thought, oh, Beau, you're making this a bit difficult for me here. So I actually had to go this afternoon and on a little excursion. So I have a present for Beau, which I would like to share with you, which is just published this week, the German edition of Beau's book, which is called, in German, Anders Sehen, which is not quite the same as Deviate, but so it's a little present. He hasn't seen this yet, so. But I thought the paper was also.
I hope it's the right one.
I hope it is. I think it was. But while he is unwrapping, so congratulations on your new publication. This was just down the road in what's that wonderful bookshop called? Exactly, yes, Hügeldeblär. It's some of I find difficult to pronounce in German. So we have here a scientist, this misfit scientist, who is also trying to show us that we really need to rethink everything about perception. And he is going to, I hope, convince us tonight that this can allow us to reconquer ourselves. And we'll discuss what that means later. But first of all, I would like to, one of the lines that I found very interesting in this book was the idea that we are all delusional. And Beau claims that he is on a mission to convince us all of this fact that we're all delusional. I really like that because there are moments in 2017 when the idea that I was having a delusion would have been an extremely welcome thought. So I'm a big fan of this idea. But I'd like now to ask Beau, what exactly do you mean by this? What do you mean by this idea that we're delusional? And why should we embrace this?
Well, actually, I'll ask you. So how many of you who woke up this morning thought you saw the world as it really is? There's always one. If you're not seeing the world as it really is, what are you seeing? How did you get here? Right? So I think you all think you see the world as it really is by asking a question of how many of you believe in the concept of illusion? Yes? That illusions exist? Okay, so if you believe in illusion, the illusion by definition is to see the world differently from the way it really is. So one of the biggest barriers to perception and changing perception is that we think we have an objective view of the world. So I thought I can actually do a couple of experiments on you to show you that you are delusional, and to show you why we see what we do. So just a little promo for perception. And so I'll try to explain the brain in about 6 slides, okay, of why you see what you do. So first of all, what's the biggest challenge that your brain evolved to see, right? And it's the challenge of uncertainty. So what I want to do is I want to show you that. So I want to stand up, and I want you to hold up your finger, and I want you to hold it up to me, okay? And I want you to line up your finger so that your finger and I are the same size, okay? Can you do that? You got it?
Which finger?
Which finger? The pointing finger, ideally. Okay, you have that? Okay, we're not the same size, right? I hope, right? So what that demonstrates at the most basic level of perception, remember, everything you see, you have no direct access to, right? All you have is access to are the senses, the information that comes from the world. But what comes from the world is completely meaningless, because it could literally mean anything. It could be a small object up close, or a large object far away, or a loud object up far away, or a quiet object up close. So your brain has no way of knowing how to see except to use its history. But what that history gives you is the history of what you saw before. So what I want to do is I want to show you that example. I'm going to skip that. I'm going to come back to that. And so I want you to see if you can hear anything interesting in this sound string, okay? A little louder. Did you hear anything? Sorry? Skateboard? Anything else? Backwards. Ah, you hear backward. You hear something that's played backward. Maybe. Okay, let me prime you with something. Okay? Read along and listen. Are you hearing it? Yes? Are you getting better at hearing it? Yes? Notice you're getting better at hearing something that doesn't actually exist. You're becoming delusional. Right? So if I go back and I get rid of the words... Oh. Okay, if you go there, we go there. And now you'll still be able to hear it. Yes? So the point is, what you see is what you see before. What you hear is what you heard before. What history gives you is not the history of what something actually turned out to be. It's the history of your past meanings, right? So that's true even at the level of seeing color. So when you're looking at these 2 cubes, you see blue tiles on the top here, yes? And yellow tiles at the top there. That is your perceptual reality. You would bet your life that they are different, when in fact, they're exactly the same, right? These tiles are the blue ones in the previous image, and these the yellows. They're always gray. Those are actually physically gray. The blue and the yellow are identical, okay? What's true is also here. You see a light orange here and a dark brown there? The tiles are not changing. What's changing is the meaning based on your history, okay? So what's true for color and form and sound is true for everything that we do, okay? I can't get rid of it now. Oh, by the way, what is that sound that's this played backwards? Right? Okay, so how could we ever see differently, right? Well, what perception gives you, what history gives you, are your biases and assumptions. You never see the world without your bias and assumptions. It's not that sometimes you do, you always do. Which means the way you change your perception is by changing your assumptions, changing your biases. So I'll give you an example, and then we can get to the conversation, which is, I want you come into the world with the bias that you look down onto surfaces. So your brain assumes you're looking down onto that surface. So as soon as I move it, you'll see it going from left to right, right? But now I want you to change your bias. Okay? I want you to assume that you're looking up at it. So that corner is towards you and that one's far away. Okay? Sometimes it helps to blur your eyes and blink, and at some point it'll go in the opposite direction. Oh, It's because it's on PowerPoint. Can you get it to flip? How many can get it to flip? Yes? Put your hand up if you can get it to flip. All you're doing is you're changing your biases, right? And I can ask you a question. Which direction is it actually rotating? Who say left to right? Who say right to left? Who say I don't care? Right? There's no motion on the screen at all. Nothing is in fact moving on the screen. There's literally no motion. That's not moving. You're looking at a series of still images that are slightly different from each other. And your brain is seeing the meaning of the change, not the change. Right? And then you're flipping it from one direction of motion to the other, depending on how you think about it. And what's true for that is true for everything we see. This screen is not blue. Light exists, but it's not colored. The color couldn't be closer to you. It's inside your head, projected outward. And what we do for color, we also do for objects. So these three objects have no meaning until I put them into motion. Okay? And suddenly your brain will create a meaning of them. This is a film made in the mid-1940s. You hate one of the triangles, right? You're feeling bad for another one. Right? It's like a horror film. You can hear the soundtrack. You're worried for the circle. Right? And I'm going to stop it there because now you want to know what happened. You're wondering what happened to the circle. And that's the thing. We hate uncertainty. We hate not knowing. But what's true for these objects is also true for other people. You can measure the what and the where and the when of a person, but you can never measure their why. So every personality we perceive is actually inside us, projected outward. In the same way we color a surface, we color other people. Every person you perceive, every personality is inside you, projected outward, right? So I'll just finish with this. So this is American football, not my favorite, but they'll hike the ball, they'll give the ball, they'll run around for 5 seconds, and it takes about 3 hours to play. Okay. So, but notice how the quarterback's going to change his behavior, and it's going to change how the defense project a meaning onto him. You can do that once. So anyway, that's my little introduction to perception, why we're delusional, but why delusion is a wonderful thing, because it creates the possibility to have agency in your own perception, right?
I want to come back to that question of why delusion is wonderful. Thank you for that. But one thing that baffled me was this dress that went wild on the internet a couple of years ago. Some people saw it as blue with black stripes. Some people saw it as having gold stripes, like white with gold stripes. And I found it was interesting for me because I could never see it as white with gold stripes, no matter how much I tried. And it seems to me bizarre that someone would see it like that. I mean, what was going on with that dress?
So that was a fascinating story for a couple of reasons. So when that happened, because I study color vision in particular, so I study how we make meaning in terms of color. And one of the reasons is because color is our most basic of perceptions. And it makes the point, most fundamentally, that what we see is something that we're constructing. So what was happening with the dress, what I loved about the dress is, so what was going on is basically...
Do people know the dress? Are you familiar with
the dress? No. So basically what happens is that your brain is contextual, right? In the same way that I could change the color of those tiles by changing the context, everything about your brain, it didn't evolve to see absolutes, it evolved to see relationships. So what happened with the dress is it was creating a certain color relationships, which is altering your perception of any particular color. What was fascinating about the story is less that, because in a sense we all know that context is everything. What was fascinating is how important and popular it was. So when people were calling to do an interview about asking what was happening, what I found more interesting in a way was how important people found it. That if your perception of color could be different from someone else's, what did that mean about my perceptions in general? I can accept that two people might have different words because they speak different languages, but surely our colors are the same. But if they're not, it created a tremendous amount of anxiety for people, actually, in some cases. Right? And so that's what I found particularly interesting, is how it really challenged people's, what they felt was an objective view of the world. And once you know how perception works, you have to have empathy. You have to have compassion. You have to enter conflict in a new way. Because you have to enter conflict with the assumption that someone has a different space of possibility than you have. And that they have a different history. So in fact, when you see someone being creative and you think they're making a big jump, they're not. For them, they're making a small step to the next most likely possible for them. What's different is that they have a different space of possibility because they have different biases and assumptions. Right? It's for you that they're making a big jump, which is why there's nothing creative about creativity. It's only creative from the outside, not the inside. So that's what the dress for me showed.
But before we come back to the question of creativity, for me it's interesting to know if what you're talking about, I mean, is this purely something that applies to humans? I mean, you're a biologist, you're a neuroscientist. Is this something that happens elsewhere in nature, that one perceives things from, with these, can other animals have visual illusions, for example?
All animals have visual illusions. So in my lab, we study not just humans, we also study bumblebees. So I train bumblebees. And we actually train bumblebees in galleries. So we were the first scientists to have an exhibition in the Hayward Art Gallery. And so we did a live bumblebee installation where we were training bumblebees. And we also did it with Michael John. That's how we met many years ago at the Science Gallery. And so they have them, but also we had the first artificial neural networks that saw human illusions. Why? Because every living system has the same problem, which is the problem of uncertainty. The world doesn't come with instructions. It doesn't tell you what to do. We all come into the world with biases and assumptions. In fact, most of your life happened without you even there. Right? You inherit your biases and assumptions, not just from your ancestors, but from your culture, from your family. Only a few of them do you actually construct. And we're not the only animal.
And then if we come back to the human, I suppose the question is, so what? So we have these perceptual biases. You're arguing that we should become more aware of the perceptual apparatus that we use to evaluate the world around us. But how can that help us? So if somebody here tonight wants to go out and suddenly become extremely aware of the strange perceptual phenomena around them, apart from a sort of almost hallucinatory experience, how is that valuable to us in our lives?
So it's valuable in a number of ways. On the sort of more social side, it's hugely important for that awareness, to know that everything you're doing is grounded in your biases. Because again, if we go back to, say, understanding conflict, and then let's imagine Michael, John, and I are in conflict, which of course we would never be, right? What we're trained to do is I'm going to put him at the opposite end of a line, and my aim is to prove that he's wrong and to shift him towards me. The problem is he's doing exactly the same. He is trying to prove that I'm wrong and to shift me towards him, right? That's almost what violence is, to grab someone, to pull them towards you. But notice that the system is there to never move. Your aim is to not move, and yet we know the only way we can learn is to shift. So conflict is set up to win but not learn, right? But as soon as you understand perception and that everything you're doing has these biases, it means you can enter conflict in a completely different way. Try, next time you're in a conflict, don't enter the conflict with an answer. Enter the conflict with doubt. Enter the conflict with uncertainty. Enter it with a question, right? And you'll find that what happens is you expand the space of possibility. Michael John no longer has to move towards me. He can move in other directions. But what's more, I can as well. And evolution is a conflicting process. We only ever learn through conflict. It's just that some of them we attach an identity to and we hate. But lots of our conflict we love, right? That's a game, that's play. To enter a situation is different from what you expect. So that's, in some sense, a very practical consequence. The other consequence is that because we know how much the brain hates uncertainty, my neurodesign studio only ever designs along a single axis, which is the axis of uncertainty. Everything we do, from the buttons we create to everything, is about playing with uncertainty. So I'll ask you a question. Why is Uber successful? They're successful not simply because they enable you to order a taxi easier. It's because they tell you when the taxi is going to arrive, right? Go out on a street corner in Munich, maybe especially, and try to get a taxi. And after 5 minutes, when you're late for a meeting, your cortisol level's up, you're massively stressed. But if I say, go to that corner, it's going to be there in 5 minutes, and I'm even going to show you where it is. Your cortisol levels stay low, you're perfectly fine, right? But in some instances, we want to increase uncertainty, like Game of Thrones. And then you get a dopamine spike, because you want the uncertainty. And that's what play is about. It's about creating a space for uncertainty, right? To not know who's going to win, right? Between Bayern Munich and Arsenal, right? Well, actually, we actually do know who's going to, going to win, sadly, in my case. Right? That's what makes it fun.
So you're now doing work with brands like L'Oreal and Cirque du Soleil and bringing these ideas about rethinking perception to them. Can you say a little bit about that? How are you doing that?
Yeah, so we're now working with companies and brands and organizations. And what we do with my lab is, we call it the Lab of Misfits, but we turn my lab into a public space. So we turn my lab into a nightclub, into theatrical experience. And we work with a brand because many brands exist for a reason other than the product they sell. So we're starting to do a series of experiments, for instance, with Cirque du Soleil. And they're passionate about awe and wonder. So now, working with Cirque du Soleil, we're creating a series of experiments about better understanding awe and wonder. For us, it's about understanding human nature. But what's more, that information can then be shared with, for instance, teachers. So he or she can then use those principles for their classroom. For Cirque du Soleil, they get to then own awe and wonder because they facilitated an understanding in it. What's more, they can then broadcast and market the fact that they did an experiment. We can create content for the experiment because the experiment is very theatrical. And then they can also broadcast the findings they have. So they get multiple targets and multiple hits at PR and marketing. But what's more, they're doing something that's bigger than themselves. And we know from neuroscience that we trust people and organizations that do something that's larger than them. So we facilitate that, and through that we actually, and then the people who attend walk away with a better understanding of themselves.
So one of the things that you're doing a lot with the Lab of Misfits, and which I think brings our worlds together a lot, is rethinking science education. And I think right now, if there's something that needs to be reconquered, it's certainly the world of science in the world of 2018. And I find your approach to engaging young people and inspiring them to get involved in science really exciting, and also relevant for us as we develop Biotopia here. So maybe you could, we could close, but if you could just say a little bit about your approach. How would you excite and awaken interest in science in young people?
Yeah, so we have the way we do it is by not calling it science. Because if you ask what is actually science, science is not a methodology. Science is a way of being, right? Science actually evolved to be effectively play with intention. That's why we evolved play. Because everything that you do to actually decrease uncertainty. You hate it. But there's only one context in which we love uncertainty, which is play. And this is why play evolved. So play is a way of being that enables you to step on uncertainty. Science is just play with intention. So then if you create a game, that's play with rules, that's an experiment. And then if you make observations of that experiment, you have data. So effectively we use science as a Trojan horse to enable kids to have the skills to ask questions and step into uncertainty. We don't teach children how to ask questions. We teach them that the cache is in the right answer, because it comes from the Victorian times when we wanted kids to be efficient. But efficiency is only one side of innovation, the other side being creativity. And the best environment for efficiency is competition in biology. A very bad environment if you want kids to ask a question. So we use science as a Trojan horse. We're not trying to necessarily teach kids to be new little scientists. We want them to have adaptability and the ability to ask questions. It just so happens that if you do it this way, our program resulted in the youngest published scientists in the world at 8 to 10 years old. They published a paper in the Royal Transaction Society, and one of the authors became the youngest ever TED speaker at 12 years old when we talked about the program. So the idea is that if we don't teach science in schools, we teach them the history lesson. Right? We teach them when it happened, who did it. Very important, let a history teacher teach it. Science is about a way of being. It's not about making it realistic, it's about making it real. Make them a scientist. Right? But in doing so, you can teach things like compassion, creativity, choice, courage. Right?
Thank you, Beau. I think we're going to have to end it there, but I hope that Beau is helping you to see things differently. He certainly helped us, and thank you very much, and enjoy your flying buffet. Thank you.